Welcome back to the City Current Radio Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're honored to be with our next guest. We're talking with Jeff Hallam. He's the Vice President of Business Development with Human Capital Concepts. How are you doing, Jeff?
Awesome. How are you doing, Jeremy?
Doing very well. So we have a lot to dive in your world in terms of what's going on, how you've been able to help companies, especially during the pandemic. And so let's start, though. Give us a little background for Human Capital Concepts in terms of what you do, a little history lesson. Give us some background.
Sure. Yeah, the official term for our industry is we're what's called a professional employer. And the industry itself is the PEO industry. We love, as you'll see throughout this discussion, we can't get enough abbreviations or, anything that we can put that kind of thing to, we'll do it in a minute. So it seems like our whole world is nothing more than a bunch of abbreviations. But in simplest terms, what we do is we really work with small employers and we simplify everything that goes into having a team of employees. And the idea behind that is when we can take all those issues and efforts off their plates and put them onto ours, it really frees them up to go out and focus on what they got into business to do in the first place. And so that's really, again, at a very high level. Happy to go into more detail, but that's a high level overview of what we do.
Yeah, carry that forward because, obviously businesses outsource the legal side. And when you talk about what, your world, there's a huge advantage for outsourcing and specialization. And so carry that forward in terms of the value add for the businesses so they can focus on what they do best and really have the best of both worlds with your team coming in and managing, just like, outsourcing the legal side, managing the HR and some of those components.
Sure. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we'll refer to kind of the three-legged stool of outsourcing from most companies. And so the two that are fairly more generally accepted are what you alluded to with legal and then likewise with accounting. And from our perspective on the HR side of things, that's becoming more and more of a trend. So it's a little bit more of an emerging thing as opposed to something that historically people have done, just because in many cases they haven't been aware that something like this is out there. So from our perspective, really when you think of a new hire's first interaction with an organization, they need to be onboarded. They've got all of the tax forms and benefit enrollments, and then they get to pick the plans, and then they have to sign up for those. You've got to pay them. You have to make sure they're covered for workers' comp. You have to handle unemployment claims. And then you go all the way through with the rest of benefits, retirement plans. That whole sequence of events from start to finish is really what we take over for an organization. And when I say we take it over, what that means is we'll do all the dirty work, if you will, behind the scenes. And the idea of that is they still have full control over things like who they hire, how much they want to pay them, what they're going to do day to day. So there's really no control that's given up. It's more just taking all of the labor and the responsibility that goes along with having those folks that is offloaded to us. So that's maybe a little bit more of an unpacking of what we do.
Yeah, and I think to your point, you can, all the legal and the changes and all of that, so you can specialize on that end. You can build in automated process. You've got specialization on your team. And so to your point, they're not giving up any control as it is you're being able to step in and help with tremendous efficiencies to be able to guide the process. Talk about technology, because when you're talking about onboarding and things like that, technology plays a vital role. So talk about technology.
Yeah, you couldn't be more right. And that's something that just even in the last 5 years, there's been a significant shift, I think, in terms of what most employees, new hires as well as existing employees, what their expectations are in terms of being able to access information that they need. So it could be, I need payroll information because I'm applying for a loan. It could be, I lost my W-2, so I need to get access to that electronically. It could be, I'm at the doctor's office and I forgot my insurance card. How do I find out what coverage I have? So again, those are just some samples of more day-to-day things that would come up. So you're right, from our perspective, technology has become a significant chunk of what our value proposition is to customers. So being able to give these smaller organizations the same type of capabilities for their team members that most larger organizations have had for the last few years usually is a pretty significant selling point, because these employees just, we all know everybody likes to joke around about millennials and how they were born with a phone in their hand and that kind of thing. But even if you take that away, people my age, your age, that whole continuum of the employee base, they're really expecting today, I need information on demand when I want it. And more often than not, I'd prefer to get it on my mobile device.
One of the things that makes you very unique as well is that personalization, almost the one-to-one ratio in terms of being able to really match up so that on the business side, they can get to know your team versus calling an 800 number. So talk about the relational side of what you do.
Yeah, and again, that's a great point to bring up. Yeah, I think for most organizations, as much as things continue to automate, and we just talked about on-demand information, that's a big chunk of this. At the same time, when you're dealing with employees, ultimately you're dealing with people. And anytime you bring people into the equation, there can be things that can't necessarily be done purely from a technology perspective. And so from our perspective, what we find most frequently in terms of feedback when we talk with customers, in terms of what they enjoy, what they appreciate about working with us, it's exactly what you were mentioning. And it's that notion of when I need something, I have a specialist for my organization. I don't have an 800 number. I don't have a call center. I don't have a team I have to go to. They have a specialist for their group that's going to be, whether there's expertise is payroll or benefits or general HR practices, could even be on the technology side. Either way, they know, again, at the touch of a button, they know they can get answers when they need them. And that tends to resonate really well because a lot of times folks want that answer now so they can get something resolved and move on with their lives.
You mentioned at the onset you like a lot of the acronyms and the initials, but PPP, there's a lot of buzzwords that came about during the pandemic. And so during the pandemic, obviously small businesses, restaurants, nonprofits really facing a lot of challenges. What did you see on your end in terms of some of those challenges and helping to navigate your clients through them during the last 12 to 16 months at this point?
Yeah, I think we all understand and acknowledge the fact that no one saw this coming. And even as it started to happen, the magnitude with which it would be felt was just something that nobody could have imagined at the time. It was just a completely different scenario. And what we found very quickly was, putting the jokes about the acronyms aside, there were a lot of those things flooding out early on as stimulus packages started to happen. So you had, as you alluded to, PPP loans. Then that was followed by PP loan forgiveness. And then you had things like FFCRA. And then you had things like ERTC. And that list goes on all the way to the most recent stimulus package, the American Recovery Act. The idea behind all of those things, all those pieces of legislation were well-intentioned and in many cases really helped people significantly. At the same time, they were so long and they had so many tentacles to them that for most small organizations, they were just getting sound bites here and there. And so they really didn't have necessarily a place to turn. And so thankfully, our leadership team determined very early on, while this isn't necessarily officially part of what we've agreed to take on for customers, we need to do this. We have to make sure that we can point them in the right direction. And so thankfully, our team did an unbelievable amount of work coming up with the idea of understanding each of these pieces of legislation, the downstream effects as it would relate to our clients and their employees, and then distilling that down into more bite-sized doses so they didn't have to spend their time trying to sift through that information and figure it out. Instead, we were able to give them very regular updates in terms of correspondence, webinars, emails, phone calls, all different sorts of methodologies, just so that they knew they had a trusted source they could come to for assistance with those things. So while it wasn't anything we all expected, it was one of those things where we really forged, in many cases, an even tighter bond with our clients because they started realizing, how much help this was really going to be to them through this very difficult time.
I think that's something right there, just the communication flow, the education focus. Those are things that will probably move forward even after the pandemic. What do you think are some things that during the pandemic has ultimately made you stronger so that when you come out, you actually have these stronger relationships, stronger processes in place. Well, what are things that you think have made you stronger coming out of it?
Yeah, I do think there's always a silver lining, no matter how dark the cloud is, and that probably what you just alluded to, that is certainly one of the silver linings. It's just this notion that we now understand, and the bar's been raised a little bit, I think, for everyone out there, regardless of what industry they're in, and regardless of how significantly or insignificantly they might have been directly impacted by COVID. I think just everyone's awareness is much higher than it was before. And so for us, it really kind of pushed us yet to another level to say, we need to make sure that if nothing else, let's be guilty of over communicating and not under communicating. And so we've seen that even as COVID has started to get a little bit more under control, and we're seeing things get a little bit more of a light at the end of the tunnel. There's that nervous optimism out there that things are going to get better. But at the same time, this latest piece of legislation came out, and there were some unintended aspects of it that do have some pretty significant impact on our clients. And we just sent out some communication in the last few days, just helping at least make them aware of it and making sure that they know they can reach out to us if they need more details on that. So that, to me, is the biggest takeaway we've had, is just to be able to make sure that not only are we aware, but let's make sure we're distributing that knowledge efficiently on a very regular basis so that people don't have to just catch it in one email. Let's make sure it's out there in multiple forms.
Talk about philanthropy and giving back to the community. That's a big part of what you do as well. And so engaging your employees, equipping them to give back, giving them hours, and then also too working with nonprofits in a lot of creative ways. So talk about the philanthropic focus.
Yeah, and this was actually one of the things that drew us to cityCURRENT early on, was the fact that there was such a strong philanthropic bent to it. And from our perspective, it really takes a handful of different shapes within our organization. So, one of the small things that we do that we hope has a fairly significant cumulative effect is we give each employee up to $100 per employee per year that they might want to donate toward any kind of a philanthropic organization of their choice. We'll match that. And it's a way that way folks feel like they've got a little bit more skin in the game, as opposed to us just picking for them. We also have a donation committee. And so we earmark a certain amount of profit every year that we set aside, so that donation committee, which changes and rotates year to year, they can pick one or more charitable organizations that we can focus on as an organization, where it can have a little bit more of a bigger splash effect. And then likewise, what we do is we allow employees time off on a regular basis to be able to volunteer their time. So that they can do that while they're still being paid, and they don't have to sacrifice or make a decision. Do I earn income today, or do I go help this organization that needs my help? And again, it's just a way for them to be a little more directly involved, as opposed to just having money taken from their check or getting notified that we supported that group. So those are some of the things that we do at the company level. In terms of what we do in terms of our services, one of the things that we believe in strongly is we offer fairly significant discounts to all of our nonprofit customers. And that's something that we've done from the beginning. And while it may not be a direct monetary donation, we feel like it's a way to give back and allow them to take advantage of some of these things, so they can have fewer worries, less exposure, less liability. And if that frees them to go out and pursue their missions even better, then we all get a win out of that.
Absolutely. What's been the feedback from your team in terms of that support to go out and give back and make a difference in the community? How has that fueled the culture, the corporate culture for your team?
It's hard to put a measurement on that, for sure. It's not as if we've gone out and done surveys of our team members, but we do hear very regularly, thankfully, that people really buy into that. Just when you put those aspects that I mentioned all together, discounting our rates for philanthropic groups, the time availability, the donations, the monetary matches, I think it helps people get a better feel. And I speak as one of them, because I'm an employee like most of our other team members. I don't feel like it's something where it's just lip service that's being paid. It's actually real. And I can go out and I can look at it and say, whatever I feel is important to me or to me and my family, I can have a little bit more of an impact on it and know that my employer supported me. So when I talk with other employees and we interact on things like that, it's kind of cool when we have our group discussions. That'll be a fairly regular piece where people will talk about things that they've done, groups that they've participated in, and usually it's all treeing back to one of those aspects of things that you and I discussed a moment ago.
Yeah. What's something that you want everyone to know about human capital concepts?
You know, I think probably one of the biggest challenges for us is, and I'll go back to one of the things that we talked about early in our discussion here. A lot of times for organizations that may not be familiar with our type of service or the fact that it's out there, a lot of times there's that initial concern that if I outsource these types of things, I'm going to lose control as an entrepreneur or as an owner. And you know, clearly most people who start an organization, they're going to be a little bit more of a driver. They're going to be a little bit more of a hard charger, and usually don't relish the idea of giving up control. And so I think that's probably, if there was one thing I had to pick as it relates to us and our profession, that'd be the thing that I think would be the biggest misnomer that I'd like to dispel, is just that notion of losing control. I think once people talk with other groups that have done it, and they talk with other owners that have taken advantage of this, that concern goes away pretty quickly. But initially the perception can be that. And so the more we can educate people that that's really not a real thing, and that instead they're able to focus just more on what they do without giving up that control, I think that would further our cause significantly all the way across the board.
We'll wrap up with contact information. Where do we go to learn more? Website, phone number, how do we get in touch?
Yeah, our website is pretty straightforward. It's just hcchr.com. Usually what I find for most folks is if they can go to the website, there's a host of information on there that'll help speak to them, whether they're somebody leading a nonprofit, whether they're leading a startup organization, or they've had a company for a while and they're just looking at what can they do to be more efficient. We've got some information out there so they don't have to sift through a lot on their own. They can actually find what they're looking for, and likewise get some better ideas of, will this work for my organization? What are things I ought to be aware of? What does HCC look like relative to other groups out there doing this same type of thing? And they can do all of those things on their own time at their own pace without having to worry about anybody looking over their shoulder and asking them questions and things of that nature. So that's usually where I would steer people first.
Well, Jeff, greatly appreciate all you and your team do. Thank you for being cityCURRENT partners as well. Thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you, Jeremy. Great to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity.